Chapter 67 to 69. Both Ray and Conan rendezvoused 5 minutes after they entered the chaos in the treetops near the mansion. Ray had a stasis scroll in his hand while Conan had a kicking and thrashing girl over her shoulders that made her show a very, very annoyed expression on her face. Her eyes were dangerously narrowed and set forward. Ray could actually see she was trying very hard not to slap some sense into the girl. The only reason the girl was not screaming was the ball of paper that found its new home in the girl's mouth and was apparently quite hard to get rid of, no matter how much the girl tried to spit it out. The girl, Kimiko, suddenly slapped Conan's but quite hard and Conan snapped. She gently put the girl on the ground, making her stop thrashing around, and for once, the only sound Kimiko let out was a muffled groan of pain. "That's it, I've had it with you," Conan said in a cold tone, making Kimiko send a glare her way. The glare didn't last long though. The second Kimiko's eyes met Conan's, she froze. Conan had a stoic expression on her face, but something in her gaze was just incredibly chilly and threatening. Kimiko quickly balled into a ball and tried to make herself as small as possible when she saw the dangerous way Conan was looking at her. It was the first time the girl experienced such fear. Ray decided to intervene before Conan actually managed to make the girl die due to a heart attack from her frosty glare. Ma, don't give her that look," he quipped towards Kana, making Kimiko look at him hopefully while Conan crossed her arms and huffed. He crouched down in front of Kimiko and smiled at her. "Don't worry. You won't be harmed. We were sent by your father to rescue you." He snickered at the word rescue. "Papa?" Kimiko tilted her head. "But, why would Papa?" That was as far as she got when Ray suddenly slapped her forehead, making her faint. Conan opened her mouth in speechlessness at the spectacle, but when she saw the paper with a knockout seal, she facepalmed. "And that's how you deal with annoying people?" Ray told Conan, highly amused, as he was sealing Kimiko's body into a stasis scroll. In the end, Conan chuckled and kissed Ray while hugging him tightly. "Shouldn't we do something like that to Mizuki's then?" she asked offhandedly, to which Ray rolled his eyes but tightened his embrace. He loved how warm Conan usually was and refused to not enjoy it when he got the chance. He caressed her back as his head swirled with ideas. "Maybe later, dear," he whispered to Conan. "For now, we gotta interrogate my captive." "A captive?" Conan asked and stepped back as she felt Ray released her from the hug. Ray only raised his hand with a stasis scroll and she instantly understood. "Which one?" she asked. "The captain," Ray said, grinning. "Now we can find out just why was this trap set up for us," he said excitedly, happily noting the sadistic gleam in Conan's eyes. Unfortunately, he had to crash her fun. "Sorry, dear, I won't allow you to torture him. I've got a better plan." "Much, much better," he said as his grin was widening into a menacing one. Barbo groggily woke up, shaking his head to get out of the daze, and quickly found out he was in an unknown room and bound, which made him completely awake pretty quickly. His eyes warily scanned the surroundings, trying to discern what was going on as he was mentally going through what happened before his blackout. His eyes suddenly widened as he remembered what happened to him, only for a colorful curse to leave his lips. He was careless and now he was going to pay for it. Nevertheless, he tried to squirm out of the bindings or use the rope escaping jutsu, but as expected, it didn't work. As he was about to get out of options, the door suddenly opened and 2 people walked inside. A young man and a young woman. He quickly understood his mission failed and he somehow got kidnapped by the downpour. Conan and Ray saw the man lower his head in resignation as they entered the room. They came in front of him when he suddenly raised his head and spoke. "If you are trying to get information from me, you will be disappointed. I will not divulge anything no matter what kind of torture you put me through." Ray smiled at that as he gazed into the man's eyes and saw he really believed that. "Let's start with something simple, then. Your name," he stated and peered into the man's eyes until the corner of the man's lips twitched. The man sighed and half-shrugged. "Barbo." It wasn't as if he was extremely famous and he doubted these 2 would get much from his name. Ray chuckled and nodded towards Conan. "She is Conan and I am Ray. But you probably already know that." "Well, we don't really plan to torture you," Ray said while his hand found its way around Conan's waist to calm her down since she was pouting slightly. They had quite a debate about this. Conan wasn't happy about having someone trying to hunt them and wanted to send a proper message to the world. As if they didn't do that already. Barbo's eyes warily observed Ray as he heard they don't intend to torture him while Ray continued. "As for your team, half of them are dead, due to samurai that guarded the mansion." He watched as Barbo flinched, his lips twisting into an amused smirk. "The good news is that they killed every samurai." He stopped for a second to let that sink. It wasn't something to be happy about. Barbo's team practically slaughtered samurai belonging to his country, which would have at least reputational consequences and, depending on the stance of the daimyo, could be quite damaging to the village in itself. Barbo showed a difficult expression as he completely understood what it meant when IWA shinobi killed IWA samurai. Especially in that kind of situation. Ray nevertheless continued with a bemused and light tone. The bad news is, the surviving calf is also dead because of Conan. Conan watched Barbo's eyes widen at that and decided that maybe it was quite good that Ray didn't allow her to vent her frustration on him. She almost pitied him, but the man would talk and it will be out of his own volition. She outstretched her hand and Barbo's body was quickly covered in paper, only his head was peeking out of them. "Let's go," she said, and Ray shrugged. They had a plan on how to make the man talk, and it seemed that Conan was quite impatient. Unfortunately for Barbo, he had a paper over his mouth, so any and all protests were silenced. The trio went outside, stopping only near Tsunade and her big slimy amphibian of a plaything. It was obvious the blonde didn't even register them as she busied herself with experimenting. Conan sat Barbo in a spot where he will have a front seat to the show and leaned on Ray's back while putting her chin on his shoulder as her hands snaked around his waist in a tight embrace. Barbo couldn't get his eyes away from the spectacle in front of him, only barely registering Ray's voice. "You see. I am sure that as a ninja, you are used to gore, but this is something different." Yes, Barbo could see that. He wanted to puke, but he was too horrified to do so. Ray continued speaking. "I am sure you would rather tell us about your little mission than go through that, right?" Barbo flinched, but his eyes still couldn't leave the amphibian as the blonde busty woman was rummaging in its body. It wouldn't be such a disturbing sight if the summoning animal that must obviously be quite intelligent wasn't cut open in such a way that Barbo could see the contents of its guts and organs still inside of its body. Its heart was still pumping, signifying that the beast was still alive as the muscles visibly constricted and loosened in a show of breathing. Even if Barbo wanted, he wouldn't be able to avert his gaze. He could only grit his teeth to prevent the bile from rising from his mouth after he croaked out. "It's still alive." Conan rolled her eyes, but it was very hard to spot since she was nuzzling her nose into the crook of Ray's neck. "Of course it is," she playfully started. "And you will be too." At that, Barbo's eyes widened as he understood why they were showing him this scene. Ray smiled to himself. Yes, just a bit more, and the man will talk by himself, no need for boorish torture. He just hoped the man wouldn't be too stubborn about it. "Yup, and I am not really inclined to put a seal that would keep you unconscious during the process. Instead, since you wanted to kill us, I will apply a seal that will keep you conscious as our little," he heard Conan snicker as he commented on Tsunade's height, "friend will look at what's inside of you. But don't you worry your little head over it, she is too experienced to make you die during it." Ray said flippantly and noticed that Barbo didn't really react to his threat, which made him frown. He redirected his eyes towards Tsunade and instantly lowered them towards the ground with a groan. That was a mistake. He did not need to see Tsunade pulling the innards out of the beast as a goddamn rope. Ray audibly gulped and took a deep breath. "Okay, we will leave you here to consider your position," he said with a broken smile towards Barbo. "We will be back in a few hours." And with that, Ray was dragged away by excited Conan, who wouldn't let these hours go to waste while Barbo was about to experience 3 hours of what Orochimaru would dub a pleasant afternoon, only 2 clones of Ray and Conan silently watching over him. When Conan and Ray returned to Barbo, they saw the man having closed eyes with a twisted expression while Tsunade giggled mischievously. Ray approached her and asked, "What did you do to the guy?" His eyebrow raised. "Oh, nothing." She waved her hand covered with a bloodied glove. "I just showed him a bit of what it means to be a medic nin." Tsunade again giggled. Really, these big bad assassins and combat experts, they never have enough guts to stomach the realities of medic nin. She rolled her eyes amusedly, patting her stomach to emphasize guts, while all around the amphibian were meters upon meters of guts strewn across the floor. Ray decided to not ask further. He rather left her to her devices and went to Barbo. Surprisingly or not, he didn't even need to open his mouth. When he came closer, Ray was greeted with eyes similar to a dead fish. "I will talk," Barbo said in a defeated and exhausted tone and hung his head low. The sight of Tsunade's autopsy of a still-breathing being must have been quite disturbing for the man. "Okay then, we are listening," Rai said as he sat on the ground next to the still paper-bound man. Barbo was quiet for a moment before he sighed and started. "That Tsuchikage doesn't like you being so good at large-scale destruction. But that's not all." Barbo mulled over his next words before starting to speak again. Kiri was always a village shrouded in the shadows. It was the village of assassins. Quiet and unnoticeable. It had to be. Kiri might be one of the Great Five, but it never had numbers or frontline fighters capable of matching other villages of the Great Four. In mist and on the sea, Kiri's forces are almost unbeatable, but on land, Kiri is no threat when it comes to invasion. It has always been that way. Even Suna is a bigger threat than Kiri. Barbo said slowly, and Ray nodded. This much, he knew. Kiri might have got fewer casualties in the war against Kumo, but it was felt. The village was smaller and more specialized towards kanjutsu and assassinations. Not many ninjas knew large-scale ninjutsu, and definitely not on the level of future Hoshigaki Kisame or Meitarumi. The Kirinin preferred silent killing rather than flashy jutsu. Oddly enough, most often than not, it was those big flashy jutsu that could be seen for miles which showed the real strength of a ninja rather than a silent and unseen approach. From this bit, Ray started to see the bigger picture and why his and Conan's existence might have been so threatening in such a huge size. After all, the old small man was always the first to jump the gun. Ray didn't voice out his reasonings and rather let Barbo speak. And then, Kiri gained you. Two ninjas famous for their flashiness. Barbo chuckled dryly. Kiri was becoming a bigger and bigger threat due to the acquisition of Kekkei Genkai in the past, but they never seemed to be able to use it all that well. The clans there still have a lot of freedom, and the Mizukage has quite limited authority over them, which stems from the joining agreements they had with the village upon becoming its members. And you know that just how exactly? Conan butted in with a quite important question. Barbo just looked at her with a deadpan gaze. They took in whoever. Sure, their anti-spy policy is very good, but they can't catch every single spy. Plus the offer of these deals that would safeguard the joining clans was the first thing Kiri offered. So many of our spies brought the information about them. He said, making Conan impassively nod, but it only strengthened the belief that she and Ray would eventually have to leave Kiri. If the enemy knew about these things, there was bound to be some fuck-up later down the line that will threaten the village. Maybe even use some political pull or a spy inside to start a civil war. The laws of Kiri were very edgy, so Conan could imagine something like that to happen. She would have to try to persuade Ray to get out of the village sooner than expected. While Conan pondered about the revelations of just how easy it was to plant a spy into Kiri, Barbo continued. Your presence in Kiri is a threat. If you raise pupils capable of performing your jutsu, the Kiri could raise its strength to rival other villages of Grade 5 on land and become a real threat. It was also obvious the Mizukage wanted to do just that, since not one of our spies managed to get any noteworthy intel about your identity or skills. And the spies being... Ray butted in, stopping Barbo in his tracks. Barbo opened his mouth but then closed it before saying, I don't know. Are you sure? Ray tilted his head and glanced towards Tsunade, but knew it was pointless. He wouldn't really take Barbo's words at face value. Obviously, he drew a seal of a truth on the guy when he was unconscious. While the seal can't make the man spit out every secret he had, it was enough to make him completely truthful while not making him even realize it. It also had the effect of making the person actually subconsciously willing to speak. That's why Barbo divulged his name so easily, and that's why it didn't take too long for him to spill. Yes. Barbo simply said, making Ray sigh. The man really had no idea who the spies were. While it didn't really matter to Ray, as Kiri was just a momentary stop, he wouldn't mind giving the Mizukage a parting present. Worse yet, Ray didn't know when he would leave Kiri, but it would be years yet. Living in the village while knowing it has spies in it. He hoped he wouldn't get paranoid. So tell me, Ray started. Was this only Tsuchikage's idea or someone else was involved? Ray was really curious about this. If it was only Tsuchikage, then good. It was expected, but if someone else was involved. Ray wouldn't like to have an unknown third party after his life. Barbo was quiet for a moment but then started talking. It was an anonymous request. They paid 3 times the max amount for S rank, so it gave a good excuse for the Tsuchikage. Half up front and the second half after the job is done. Ray nodded. So there was some bastard who wanted them dead, after all. Tsuchikage had to think about the good of the village and wouldn't pull a stunt like this without an enormous excuse. So, someone is trying to instigate a third ninja war, huh? Ray distractedly stated with a frown, making Barbo exclaim. What? He gaped at Ray, but from his expression it was clear the gears were turning in his head, thinking about how Ray came to such a conclusion. It didn't take long for Barbo to understand. Conan and Ray were quite important for Kiri's progress. At least, that was the conclusion from all the information embargo the Mizukage employed. Their death would surely sour the relations between Kiri and IWA, add a few similar kinds of missions for other villages, and voila, the conclusion is clear. It would lead to another war not 10 years from the end of the previous one. The main point was the payment. Nobody pays 3 times the amount for S rank. Not even nobles or the daimyo. It's just not done, so when someone offers it, the village should be hell of alerted that something was fishy. Not even the assassination of a daimyo would be so costly, after all. But clearly, the villages would jump at the vision of money if the client seemed trustworthy. considering the problems IWA had with Rei and Conan's continuous existence and Inoki's stubborn hot-headedness. Yes, the anonymous person knew well who to approach for the job. Rei was about to continue asking questions when Tsunade finally finished with the salamander for the day and approached them after healing him up to health, her previously white coat now covered in innumerable bloodstains. Her face sported a wide Cheshire smile as she turned towards Rei. "So how does your little interrogation go?" she asked while looking at Barbo, who instantly tried to scurry away, but his body was tightly bound, so he managed to only avert his gaze towards the ground while quivering. "Ha! Guess Tsunade really inflicted trauma on the poor bastard." Rei resisted the urge to snicker when Tsunade suddenly hugged him, making him go rigid. "Ah." He bit out, his arms not reaching towards her back. "Sue. You know you are from head to toe covered in blood." Rei asked with indignation in his tone, and Tsunade instantly stepped back with a sheepish look as she saw the entirety of Rei's shirt covered with one big red stain. The awkward atmosphere was quickly interrupted by Barbo. "You people are insane," he said with wide eyes, staring at the blood-covered shirt of Rei. "How can you not react at all? She has more blood on herself than any torturer of IWA could hope to see after a month of work. You people are insane," Barbo repeated, quivering at the sight of blood, and Tsunade only tilted her head. "Did my little show perhaps give him hemophobia?" Both of her eyebrows rose in surprise at that, and even Rei face-bombed. Oh, the irony. The interrogation continued and they got more information from Barbo, mostly about IWA and its defenses, but nothing too substantial, as the man was fiercely loyal and would rather go through torture than give them the important details. The seal of truth was quite handy, and the man probably blabbed way more than he wanted while not even noticing it, but nevertheless, he wouldn't budge when Rei asked about sensitive things like the times of patrol changes and seal defenses. It's not like they needed those anyway. And Barbo didn't need to be so secretive about it either. Who would they show the information to? The Mizukage. As if the old coot didn't deserve to know their findings. No, Rei had something better in mind. Something immediate. The Tsuchikage wanted to hunt them down, so he would need to be punished for it. Conan wouldn't have it any other way, and Rei wasn't about to let bygones be bygones. After all, he wasn't the only target. Kano was one too, and that made him mad. That's why they now stood not a half-kilometer away from Iwagakure, observing it through their senses. "Do you really think it is a smart idea?" Conan asked, a bit worried about what they were going to do. She wanted to do it even more than Rei, as she wasn't the forgiving sort, but for now, this appeared to be quite a risk. She didn't want Rei to be in danger, so she had to at least try to be the voice of reason. "Smart? Of course not." Rei snorted. "It is bats hit insane, and that's why it will work." His lips spread into a Cheshire grin. "Especially since we are going to do it by our own rules," he said, and took out 2 scrolls, making Conan widen her eyes at what that meant. "You want to use that?" she asked in bewilderment. These scrolls were their last resort and only to be used when they needed to run. To use them here. Conan suddenly stopped in her tracks as her mind understood what this meant when she added into equation Rei's personality. These are not your mayhem scrolls, these are different," she stated, smirking as she saw Rei shrug. "I had a bit of time and decided to prepare a show for our Rocky comrades. After all, someone has to show them what it means to have the will of rock." Rei snickered. Indeed, these scrolls were not his mayhem scrolls as Conan dubbed them. No, they were his mayhem scrolls V2, specially made for this occasion. "Should I use mine too though?" Conan asked with furrowed eyebrows. "You know, to make bigger numbers." "Nah. It's good. I made sure to seal away enough. We will have a different job. We can't really kill the old goblin, so the punishment would have to be something impactful yet delicate." "I know exactly the thing," Rei excitedly exclaimed, making Conan purse her lips in expectation. Inoki sat in his office doing the paperwork as was his damned routine. The day he became the Tsuchikage will be forever etched into his memory as the most glorious day of his existence, but it will also be the most sorrowful day for him. The day he forsook his soul to the devil of the bureaucracy. The day when the strong, handsome, capable, and most importantly handsome guy he was, changed into a grumbling man who had to sit on a special chair for his head to be above the table when giving orders. But that wasn't his main problem. He thought being a Kage would be a bit more interesting. But it is not. It's an almost painful existence where he has to balance the entire village, its clans, ninja, and civilians to coexist peacefully. This was a dictatorship and he was on the top, but even then he had so much work. At least he has a free hand in how he does things. As he was about to fill his last paper from an entire stash, the entire office shook, making the stash he had deposited on the edge of the table fall down and fly all around his office in the flurry of papers. Inoki watched with an expression like a deer in headlights as this happened, his mind refusing to process that the pile he spent the last 2 days perfecting to his utmost ability was now destroyed. Just like that. In but a second. As he watched his paper-covered office, Inoki genuinely thought that even his dust style could cause so much damage to him as this sight. His spirit was literally in pieces. Just then, his secretary barged inside of his office with a startled expression, desperately gasping for breath. Inoki turned to her with his gaze that resembled a dead fish and lifelessly asked. What? The secretary tried to quickly calm down as she heaved up, her arms on her knees. Hearing Tsuchiki's question, she hurriedly exclaimed. Tsuchikage-sama. We are being invaded. Inoki heard her and his mind stopped. His temper instantly flared, but he forcefully calmed himself down and his expression turned to stoical seriousness. Who is invading us? He asked the secretary. Hurrying off to the battlefield would be idiocy. He first needed to know what exactly was going on and then organize his troops. No matter the situation, he was the Kage. Not a common ninja. His duties lied with leadership rather than fighting on the front lines. He was the trump card of the village, after all. When he asked the question, he could see the secretary momentarily squirm and his temper flared again, this time on the woman. She said they were being invaded and he knew she would never dare to joke about such a matter, so why was she now hesitating? Speak, woman. We are burning time. The secretary took a deep breath to calm herself and her professionalism took over. Only that made her able to say the next part with a straight face without cringing. We are under attack by monkeys in Hokage robes. She said stoically, and even she was surprised she didn't actually blush. As Inoki heard her, his mind stopped for a second, giving her a blank gaze. Come again. He asked unsurely, briefly glancing towards the calendar, wondering if it is April 1st already. Author, yup, they have those there. We are under attack by monkeys in Hokage robes. The secretary repeated in a deadpan tone. Are you sure it isn't a prank? Inoki stated dryly. He was too old to deal with some snot-nosed brat vying for attention. That job was for his son. Why would they bother him with monkeys dressed like the Hokage? That could be the national joke. The secretary nodded and started describing what was happening. They trashed the marketplace, heavily graffitied the surrounding mountains and buildings, strewn the underwear of the villagers all across the village. Many mothers complain they stole lollipops from their kids. The ninja are getting caught in some sticky traps that are making them glued to each other. The worst part is that when the ninja try to attack them, they are ganged upon by 10 others. They cause all sorts of mischief, but worse yet, we had reports of them in secret divisions where they mess up archives and libraries. The violent shaking of the Kage Tower was also caused by them. They both understood the danger they were facing if these monkeys got into restricted archives of various divisions, and Inoki scowled as he now had the culprit for his wasted paperwork. The secretary wasn't finished though. With a grim face, she continued. It all started an hour ago and by now, there must be at least 1,000 of these monkeys. We call it an attack because... The secretary gulped. Because they changed to rock upon defeat, not unlike rock clone jutsu. It is definitely the work of some ninja. But surprisingly they don't aim to seriously cripple Iwagakure. If they did, they had many opportunities so far. Especially since they appeared in hundreds. Our ninja's first reaction was to roll on the ground in laughter. Her lips slightly twitched upwards. These monkeys are basically trolling us. Inoki opened his mouth but instantly closed it as he sprang up on his feet when he understood what he was just told, his vein pulsing. Call for the leaders of each division ASAP. We gotta start counterattacking these trolling monkeys. Nobody is going to troll my village.